Hey there, 2D Design. We are going to continue to talk about paint. In our last project, we talked a little bit about it, and we just did tints where we used our primary colors and added white. This time, we are going to shift and just use achromatic value scales today, which means just using black and white. And then we'll get into full color theory later, where we can turn our primary colors into secondaries, tertiaries, and then all the really pretty colors beyond. So we're just going to use our black and white today. You have them in the little kit, but then I had you also get a second tube because this is going to be one of the colors that you may go through quite a bit. So I'll just set those aside. If you want to go back and watch one of the earlier videos, I'll post it below where I talk about all the tools and the brushes. But for the most part, at the beginning, I'm just going to use my flat shader, or my flat wash brush, excuse me, that's synthetic. And we'll test out some of these here in a little bit. But we're going to start with that. And we're going to need a palette knife. I can get one that's not quite so junky. We will need our mixed media paper, and I'm going to use my ruler to tear it down. We need a cup of water, a little towel that we can clean our brushes with. If you have a little squirt bottle, you might want that. And then we will also need our palette box. And in it, just like in our last tinting exercises, I took one of the Stay Wet palette papers and already got it wet and put it in there. And that's what these are. Again, you can review all of the steps and the explanation of these in one of the previous videos. But before we start the actual painting, I wanted us to just get our paper ready. So we're going to take one sheet of the mixed media board. And I wanted you to try it on this instead of the sketchbook, the mixed media sketchbook, because we're going to be painting our real designs on these. And you'll have a better sense of how the paint takes to them, which you kind of already do because we tested it with our tinted primary scale. And what I want you to do is tear it or cut it into quarters. So 1/2 of 11, 5 1/2. And 1/2 of 14 is 7. So I'm going to start by tearing the 7 down. If you'd rather cut these with an X-Acto knife, if you have the means, you can. But I'm just going to tear them. And this is a neat way. You just have to make sure you hold the ruler really carefully to make a paper have a homemade deckled edge, so it kind of looks like pretty watercolor paper. Oops, I'm going to have to remark my 5 1/2. Just make sure you hold the ruler really tight so that it doesn't slip. Five and a half. Okay. Okay. Then once you have these quartered, we will start painting. So we're going to make 4 little tests, excuse me. One of them, I'm going to write on the back, we're going to do just an ombre, which will have like a soft value scale. You could write that, soft transition value scale. Then we're going to do a stepped value scale where we don't blend. We're going to do a circle with full value range. And a cube with full value range. Okay, oops, I keep forgetting to write my E. All right, so our plan here is that we're going to try and tape these out. You should have some painter's tape in your kit. And we are going to start with the full step value scale. That's the cube. Yeah, the stepped value scale. And I'm going to tape this down. I'm going to try to be really careful about it. If you have fairly decent light, you can see where the tape will sit on the edges, so you have a nice border. And once you have the tape down, you want to make sure so that the paint doesn't bleed. You're going to push pretty hard just on the edge that you're going to paint into, but you don't want to have to squish it down too hard all over, just in the edges and the corners. And you have to be really careful when you peel it off, but I'll explain. Okay, so before we paint it, we want to start by laying out our value scale. So like we did in our last exercise, we're going to always try to put our working pots of paint on the outside and then do the mixing in the middle. But we're just going to do a black and white right now. So I'm going to do the size of like a healthy Hershey's Kiss size in the black, and then about the same size over here. Part of these exercises are to help you see how far the paint will go and if you need more or less and how to work with it. Okay, so our goal is that we want to try and create a 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. That's going to be our goal. So let's start with our 50 in the middle. So I'm going to take a big hunk of black in the middle, maybe not quite half of our first step. And then I'm going to wipe off my knife in between so that I don't contaminate my white. And I'm going to try and do about the same proportion, so 50-50, hopefully making a middle 50 gray. And like we talked about in the last video, you want to try and squish, like push it together and try to combine that pigment together. So you're not trying to like stir it, you just want to squish it. I don't think that's quite a 50. And how do you know? It's all relative. Like you don't know until you have your other ones built, but we'll go with that for now. And what I'm going to do, since I feel like it's a little lighter, is that's where I'm going to jump and put my 30. I'm going to clean my knife off. I'm going to add a little more black to this to see if I can get closer to a 50. And I'll add white to that one. It got a little darker. It seems good for now. I might add some in a minute, but we'll see. Okay, so then to make my 30, I'm gonna grab more white, probably like a quarter of the other size. And what's cool with value is if you can master a value scale, whether it be with actual paint or with charcoal or graphite or markers, or even on the computer, like in Photoshop or Illustrator, you can control how people read your space, which is really great. Okay, and then I want to make 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my middle gray. And I'm going to grab my black. And by making the 30, 50, 70, then you can kind of work in between to find your 20s and your 10s, but you have these bolder kind of steps. So we're going to start with that. And we're just going to paint a strong value scale. So, sorry, I'm going to take my 1-inch Blick Essentials wash brush. I'm going to dip it in my water a little bit and just blot off my brush a bit, but it helps to have a little water in there to get started. And I'm going to start, really it doesn't matter which way you go, like if you did the white or the black, it's mostly that you clean your brushes in between. So I'm just going to start with the black. So I'm going to load up my brush. And now my black is gone. Like I might have to get more black when I get into some of my other studies. And this paint is not very expensive. So I say we use it. Learn how to paint, learn color theory. Don't be afraid to really use it. I'm being very careful when I paint the edges. I'm trying not to brush into the edge too much. I'm trying to paint away from it. Sometimes I might have to go in a different direction, but just enough so that it doesn't bleed underneath. If it gets too dry brushy, you can dip your brush in the water just barely, just a little, and then kind of reload your brush, and it makes it a little, makes it move a little better. Add a little more water. There we go. I'm going to rinse my brush. Just kind of scrub it on the bottom of the cup. Dry it off just a little bit. And then I'm going to jump to my 70. And I want to try and make sure that I cover all the paper so that I don't have any little white gaps showing. We did this in the last exercise, but if you had a lot of paint left in your brush, you can scoop it out back onto your palette. I have a lot of paint left. Okay, I'm going to jump to my 50. Rinse out my brush. I don't have to rinse it a ton, like if I'm using color. When I start using color, it's going to be more important that I get that contamination out. But since I'm all in grayscale, it doesn't matter too much. And hopefully these little exercises help you see the viscosity of the paint, how they move, how they blend across the surface. If you want to add a little more water again. To make it flow a little better. I'm going to scoop that color out. Rinse my brush. You can kind of see on the acrylic what happens if you coat over one that's underneath and still wet, which I'm going to show you in a second. Scrape this out. And then I'll switch to my white. I am going to really try and scrub my brush out pretty well this time because I want my white to be clean. Okay. You can see how much paint it takes with these little exercises. If you're feeling really ambitious, you could try to mix in your 10s, your 40s, and so on. And you could make a more complicated value scale if you wanted. But we are going to keep it simple like this. Okay, so even while it's wet, but you just have to be a little careful, you can peel off the tape. The key to peeling the tape is that you want to peel at an angle, kind of slowly, in case you see that it is starting to tear the paper. If it does tear the paper, you want to switch directions with the tape and try to save it, so that you don't just like rip it off like a Band-Aid. Put this over here. And the key is just not to get it, get the wet stuff on your surface. Yep, there, it just tore. I'm going to stop on that one for a minute and go this way. So this one started to tear here. So I'm going to go the other direction. So I do the least amount of damage there. When it dries, I can glue that down. And here we have a drastic 0, 30, 50, 70, 100 value scale. And your designs that we're going to paint as we get moving through this project could be painted this way, where you mix up your values first and then you just paint them in these kind of successions. But the next one we're going to paint is going to be an ombre. So I think I'm going to pause the video so that you can kind of get your papers out and then pick back up. So I'll be back in just 1 second.